Some people inherit money. Others inherit heirlooms or jewelry. I inherited responsibility. My name is Michael Thornton, and when my father passed away 3 years ago, he left me his home, 5 acres of land on the edge of Pinecrest, and an unspoken duty that I never fully understood until recently. The property sits at the base of the Western Hills. It is an old place with weathered wood siding and a wraparound porch where my father used to sit and watch the sunset. Behind the house, past the vegetable garden and tool shed, there is a rusted iron gate. Nothing special to look at, just an old gate with peeling green paint and a simple latch. But what makes this gate important is not how it looks. It is what lies beyond it. My land contains an underground access point to the town's emergency water system, a control valve that regulates flow from the reservoir in the hills to our community of 8,000 people. My father maintained that access point for 40 years. The town trusted him with it, and now they trusted me. The arrangement was simple. In case of emergency, the fire department or water authority could access my property to manually override the system. It had only happened twice in my lifetime, once during the flood of '98 and again during the drought of 2007. Most days I lived a quiet life. I maintained my father's garden, worked remotely as a software consultant, and kept to myself. Pinecrest had changed over the years. The old farms on the north side had been developed into cookie-cutter subdivisions with names like Oak Meadows and Highland Estates. These newer homes fell under the jurisdiction of the Pinecrest Community Association, known to most as the HOA. My property predated all of that. Our deed went back to 1924, long before zoning laws and community guidelines. We were grandfathered in, exempt from HOA rules. My father had made sure of that with proper legal documentation. I first noticed Corinne Witherspoon at the town council meeting last spring. She sat in the front row, her platinum blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, designer glasses perched on her nose. She interrupted the mayor 3 times with questions about property values and community standards. 2 weeks later, she was elected president of the HOA. Within a month, violation notices began appearing all over town. The Millers' basketball hoop was non-regulation. The Garcia's bird bath was unsightly. The retirement community's flower arrangements were disorderly. Corinne and her committee of 4 like-minded women were on a mission to make Pinecrest pristine, regardless of who they upset in the process. I paid little attention to all this. After all, I was exempt from their jurisdiction. Until one Tuesday morning in early October when I noticed a black SUV with the HOA logo parked near my front gate. Through my kitchen window, I watched Corinne step out, clipboard in hand, her heels sinking slightly into the soft earth of my front yard. She studied my property with narrowed eyes, made several notes, then took photographs of my gate. I should have confronted her then and there. Instead, I told myself she was probably just being nosy. I had no idea that her presence that day was the beginning of a chain of events that would put our entire community at risk. 3 days after Corinne's uninvited visit, I found an official letter in my mailbox. The envelope bore the Pinecrest Community Association letterhead, complete with their tree logo embossed in gold. I opened it while standing in my driveway, the autumn wind rustling the paper in my hands. "Dear Mr. Thornton," it began, "it has come to our attention that the rear access gate on your property does not comply with community safety standards. All exterior gates must be secured with approved locks as per the Community Guideline Amendment 14B, adopted September 1st. You have 14 days to install an approved HOA lock, available for purchase at the community office for $99.99, or face a noncompliance penalty of $250 per week." The letter was signed in flowing script. Corinne Witherspoon, President, Pinecrest Community Association. I read it twice, then folded it and placed it on my kitchen counter. That evening, I drafted a response explaining that my property was exempt from HOA jurisdiction and that the gate in question served as an emergency access point for town utilities. I included copies of the original property documents and a letter from the previous town manager confirming the arrangement. I mailed my response the next morning, assuming that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Exactly 1 week later, while I was pruning the old apple tree in my front yard, a black SUV pulled into my driveway. Karen stepped out, dressed in a tailored navy pantsuit, her lips painted a shade of red that matched her manicured nails. Behind her came a balding man with a camera and another woman clutching a tablet. "Mr. Thornton," Karen called out, not waiting for me to acknowledge her. "We received your letter claiming exemption from community guidelines. I am afraid that is not how things work in Pinecrest." I climbed down from my ladder and wiped my hands on my jeans. "Ms. Witherspoon, my property is not part of your association. It never has been." She smiled, but the expression did not reach her eyes. "Every property in Pinecrest falls under our purview for matters of security and aesthetics. Your situation may exempt you from certain guidelines, but not from basic safety measures." "There is nothing unsafe about my gate," I said. Karen gestured to her male companion, who began taking photographs. "An unsecured access point is a liability. What if children wandered onto your property? What if there was theft? The HOA would be partially responsible." "No, you would not. And that gate leads to a town water valve. It needs to remain accessible." Something flickered across her face, interest, perhaps, or calculation. "A water valve? All the more reason it should have proper security. We cannot have just anyone accessing town utilities." "No one does. The fire department and water authority have my contact information. They call when they need access." Karen made a note on her clipboard. "That is all very outdated, Mr. Thornton. In modern communities, we have protocols, standards." She glanced around my property with obvious disapproval. "Your father may have had informal arrangements, but things change. Progress happens." The way she mentioned my father, dismissively, almost condescendingly, made something in my chest tighten. "The arrangement stands, Ms. Witherspoon, and your association has no authority here." Karen's smile hardened. "We will see about that." She handed me another letter. "This is your final notice. Comply within 7 days or we will take further action." After they left, I contacted Matthew Chen, the town engineer who occasionally inspected the water valve. He confirmed what I already knew. My access point was critical to the emergency system, and any changes would need to go through proper channels, not through the HOA. Matthew promised to speak with Karen and clarify the situation. He called her that same afternoon. Later, he told me she had been coldly polite, saying she understood the concern, but that community safety protocols must still be followed. For the next few days, things were quiet. No more visits, no more letters. I thought perhaps Matthew's intervention had resolved the issue. Then I had to travel to Portland for a 3-day work conference. I left early Thursday morning, asking my neighbor, Mrs. Castillo, to collect my mail and water the indoor plants. I had no idea that Karen was watching, waiting for her opportunity. An opportunity that would come at the worst possible time for our town. I returned from Portland late Sunday afternoon, tired from the conference and the 4-hour drive. As I pulled into my driveway, Mrs. Castillo hurried across from her house, her face etched with concern. "Michael," she called out, "that woman from the HOA came by with 2 men on Friday. They went to your back gate." I thanked her and quickly made my way around my property. What I found made my blood run cold. The old gate was now secured with a heavy-duty chain and a gleaming silver padlock bearing the HOA logo. A laminated notice had been zip-tied to the chain. "This access point has been secured in accordance with Community Safety Measure 14B. Unauthorized tampering will result in immediate legal action. For access, please contact the HOA office during business hours, Monday, Friday, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. I pulled out my phone and dialed Karen's number, which was printed at the bottom of the notice. It went straight to voicemail. I left a message demanding she remove the lock immediately, explaining once again that this was an emergency access point. Next, I called Matthew Chen, but it was Sunday evening, and he did not answer either. I left him a detailed message about what had happened. Then I called the non-emergency police line to report Karen's trespassing, but the officer who took my call said it was a civil matter and advised me to contact a lawyer. I spent the rest of the evening researching my legal options. According to county records, Karen had no right to place a lock on my property. I planned to visit the town manager first thing in the morning and file a formal complaint. But fate had other plans. At approximately 2:30 in the morning, I was awakened by the sound of sirens. Many sirens. I went to my front porch and saw an orange glow in the sky toward the northwestern part of town, where the new developments backed up against the pine forest. A wildfire had broken out. October had been unusually dry, and the pine forest was like tinder. High winds were pushing the fire toward homes at a frightening pace. I turned on the local emergency radio station and heard the fire chief ordering additional units and calling for immediate water pressure increase to the northwest hydrant system. That system was connected to the main line that ran under my property. In major emergencies, the valve behind my gate would need to be opened to increase water flow to that part of town. Sure enough, my phone rang at 2:45. It was Fire Captain Rodriguez. "Michael, we need immediate access to the emergency valve. The northwest pressure is dropping, and we cannot contain the fire without more water." "I will meet you at the gate," I said. "But there is a problem. The HOA put a lock on it." "They what? Never mind, just meet us there. We will cut it off if we have to." I pulled on my clothes and ran outside. 3 fire department vehicles were already at my front gate, lights flashing. Captain Rodriguez and 4 firefighters followed me to the back gate. When Rodriguez saw the heavy chain and padlock, he swore under his breath. "We do not have time for this. The Peterson and Knowles families are being evacuated. 2 homes are already gone." One of the firefighters tried to cut the lock with their tools, but it was a high-security model designed to resist cutting. Precious minutes ticked by. "I have bolt cutters in my shed," I said, running to get them. By the time we finally cut through the chain, nearly 15 minutes had been lost. Rodriguez and his team rushed through to access the valve, but the delay had consequences. Later, we would learn that 4 homes had been completely destroyed, and 3 more were severely damaged. The fire department eventually contained the blaze, but they did so with insufficient water pressure for the critical first half hour. As dawn broke, I stood on the hill behind my property, watching smoke rise from the northwestern part of town. Emergency vehicles still crowded the streets. Displaced families huddled in the community center parking lot. The local news van had arrived, and reporters were interviewing the fire chief. That is when I saw her. Karen Witherspoon pulled up in her black SUV, immaculately dressed despite the early hour. She stepped out and surveyed the scene, her expression shifting from confusion to alarm as the fire chief pointed in the direction of my property. She spotted me and began walking over, her usual confidence somewhat diminished. Before she could speak, Captain Rodriguez approached, his face streaked with soot, his expression thunderous. "Are you the one who locked the emergency water access?" he demanded. Karen straightened her jacket. "I am Karen Witherspoon, HOA president. We secured an unsanctioned gate as per community guidelines." "That gate," Rodriguez interrupted, "controls the water pressure to the fire hydrants in the northwest sector. Because of your lock, we lost valuable time and could not save the Peterson home, or the Knowles home, or the Thomas home." Karen's face paled. "I was not informed this was an emergency." "Yes, you were," I said, stepping forward. "I told you, the town engineer told you, you chose to ignore us." People were gathering, now firefighters, residents, news reporters, all listening. Karen tried to regain control of the situation. Mr. Thornton refused to comply with safety regulations. If he had simply installed an approved lock and provided access codes. "My property is not under HOA jurisdiction," I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You trespassed and interfered with town emergency infrastructure." The fire chief had joined us now. "Is this true?" he asked Rodriguez, who nodded grimly. 15 minutes to cut through that lock," Rodriguez confirmed. 15 minutes when we had no adequate water pressure." The chief turned to Karen. "I will need your information, Ms. Witherspoon. There will be a formal investigation into this matter." For the first time since I had met her, Karen Witherspoon looked genuinely afraid. By noon, the situation had evolved from a neighborhood dispute to a town crisis. The fire was contained, but the damage, both physical and emotional, was evident throughout Pinecrest. As residents returned to assess their homes, news of the locked gate and delayed water access spread rapidly. I stood with Fire Chief Markson as he documented the cut lock and chain still lying by my gate. The town manager had arrived, along with a representative from the County Emergency Services Department. This access point has been designated as critical infrastructure since 1978, the town manager explained, showing documentation on his tablet. It should never have been restricted. The county representative took photographs and made notes. "Who authorized this lock installation?" she asked. Before I could answer, a black SUV pulled up, and Karen stepped out, accompanied by a man in a suit who I assumed was her lawyer. Her composure had returned, though her eyes darted nervously between the officials gathered at my gate. "Ms. Witherspoon," Chief Markson said, his voice controlled but steely, "would you please explain why you placed this lock on a designated emergency access point?" Karen's lawyer started to speak, but she cut him off. "The Pinecrest Community Association has been implementing updated security measures throughout the neighborhood. Mr. Thornton's unsecured gate was flagged as a safety concern." "Did you consult with the town about these measures?" the county representative asked. "We notified all affected property owners," Karen replied. "Mr. Thornton chose not to comply." "Because I am not part of the HOA," I interjected, "and because this gate serves a critical function." Karen turned to me, her expression hardening. "If you had simply followed procedures like everyone else, none of this would have happened. You should have installed the approved lock and registered it with our office." Chief Markson stepped forward. "Ms. Witherspoon, are you suggesting that Mr. Thornton is responsible for the delay in emergency response?" "I am saying that proper channels exist for a reason," she insisted. "If he had complied—" "If you had listened," I interrupted, my patience finally breaking, "or checked with the town before putting your lock on my gate, 4 families would still have homes today." A small crowd had gathered: neighbors, a few news reporters, and several residents from the fire-affected area. Among them were the Petersons, standing silently, their faces still showing the shock of losing their home. Karen noticed them and faltered momentarily. She smoothed her jacket and tried again. "The HOA is committed to community safety. You are not listening," the town manager cut in. "This gate is town infrastructure. Your association had no authority to restrict it. None. We have jurisdiction over exterior fixtures and security throughout Pinecrest," Karen insisted, though with less conviction. Mrs. Peterson stepped forward from the crowd. "Our home is gone," she said quietly. "Our family photos, our children's artwork, everything, because you wanted to prove a point." Karen looked genuinely uncomfortable now. "That is not what happened," she said. "There are protocols." "Protocols?" Chief Markson's voice rose. "Let me tell you about protocols. I have firefighters who risked their lives last night trying to contain that blaze without adequate water pressure. That is the direct result of your unauthorized lock." The county representative finished her notes. "Ms. Witherspoon, I will need a formal statement from you for our incident report. This will be submitted to the State Emergency Management Office for review." Karen's lawyer finally spoke up. "My client acted in good faith to secure the neighborhood." "Your client interfered with emergency services during a crisis," the representative replied. "That has serious implications." As the officials continued their documentation, I noticed several HOA committee members in the crowd, distancing themselves from Karen both physically and metaphorically. The unified front was cracking. Chief Markson approached me as the others dispersed. "Michael, we will need to formalize the access protocol for this gate. No more informal arrangements. I want proper documentation and clear guidelines so this never happens again." I nodded. "Whatever you need, Chief." As the officials prepared to leave, Karen approached me one last time, her lawyer trailing behind her. "This is not over, Mr. Thornton," she said quietly. "The HOA board will be discussing this matter." I looked her directly in the eyes. "I think you have bigger problems than me now, Karen. 4 families lost their homes, and everyone knows why." She turned and walked stiffly to her SUV, the weight of consequence finally settling on her shoulders. By the following morning, the gate lock scandal, as the local news had dubbed it, dominated conversation throughout Pinecrest. The county newspaper ran a front-page story with the headline, "HOA lock delayed fire response, homes lost." Television news vans from the nearby city parked outside the community center, where emergency services had set up a support station for affected families. My phone rang constantly, neighbors offering support, reporters seeking comments, and even an attorney offering to represent me in any potential litigation. I declined the legal help for now, but I did speak briefly with the local newspaper, sticking to the facts without embellishment. Online, the story spread rapidly. The community forum filled with posts from residents sharing their own experiences with the HOA under Karen's leadership. What emerged was a pattern of overreach, excessive fines, and intimidation. Many had been afraid to speak up individually, but collectively, their stories painted a disturbing picture. The Garcias revealed they had been fined $300 for a bird bath that had been in their garden for 20 years. The retirement community residents disclosed weekly violation notices for everything from the color of their curtains to the placement of garden gnomes. Even businesses in the small commercial district complained about arbitrary enforcement of signage rules. By Wednesday evening, a petition demanding Karen's resignation had gathered over 500 signatures. The town council announced an emergency meeting for Friday to address the situation and review HOA governance. I spent those days helping with cleanup efforts in the fire-damaged area, bringing water and supplies to volunteers. The Peterson family recognized me from the confrontation with Karen and approached as I unloaded bottles of water from my truck. "You are the gate owner," Mr. Peterson said. It was not a question. I nodded. "I am so sorry about your home." Mrs. Peterson surprised me by taking my hand. "We do not blame you. We know who is responsible." Throughout the community, the mood was shifting from shock to anger. The initial tragedy of the fire was giving way to a collective reckoning with years of HOA overreach. Karen remained conspicuously absent from public view, though her lawyer issued a brief statement claiming that the HOA had acted within its authority to secure the neighborhood, and that multiple factors contributed to the fire response. Friday evening arrived, and the town hall was packed beyond capacity. People stood along the walls and spilled out into the hallway. The mayor, a normally reserved woman in her 60s, called the meeting to order with visible emotion in her voice. "Tonight, we address a situation that has impacted our community deeply," she began. "The recent fire revealed serious issues with how our neighborhood is governed." The town manager presented a timeline of events, including documentation of my property's exempt status and the critical nature of the water valve access. The fire chief followed with a detailed report on how the locked gate had delayed response time and affected water pressure. When it was my turn to speak, I approached the microphone with a knot in my stomach. Public speaking had never been my strength, but the gravity of the situation pushed me forward. "I have lived in Pinecrest my entire life," I began. "My father maintained that water access point for 40 years without incident. It was a responsibility he took seriously, as do I when Karen Witherspoon placed that lock on my gate. She did more than trespass on private property. She interfered with infrastructure that belongs to all of us." From the back of the room, Karen's voice rang out. "That is not what happened." She pushed her way forward, her usual polished appearance somewhat diminished. "The HOA has every right to enforce security measures." The mayor interrupted. "Ms. Witherspoon, you will have your turn to speak." Karen continued anyway. "If Mr. Thornton had simply registered for an approved lock." The room erupted in boos and shouts. Someone called out, "My son's bedroom burned because of your lock." Another voice yelled, "You have been terrorizing this town long enough." The mayor banged her gavel repeatedly until order was restored. "Ms. Witherspoon, if you interrupt again, you will be asked to leave." When Corinne finally had her official turn at the microphone, her attempts to justify her actions fell flat. She spoke of community standards and proper protocols, but her words seemed hollow against the backdrop of lost homes and displaced families. The town council chair, a retired judge, spoke next. "It appears that the Pinecrest Community Association has operated beyond its legal authority in multiple instances. The council is ordering an immediate independent investigation into HOA practices, bylaws, and enforcement actions over the past 18 months. The announcement was met with applause. The mayor added that emergency protocols would be reviewed and updated, with clear documentation of critical infrastructure access points throughout town. As the meeting concluded, Corinne slipped out a side door, avoiding the crowd. But the damage was done. The town had spoken and accountability was coming. The investigation into the HOA revealed far more than anyone had anticipated. Over the next 2 weeks, a team of county officials and an independent auditor poured through records, interviewed residents, and reviewed HOA actions under Corinne's leadership. What they found shocked even those who had been critical of her regime. Financial discrepancies, selective enforcement of rules, undocumented emergency meetings where significant decisions were made without proper member notification, fines that exceeded legal limits. The picture that emerged was not just of overreach, but of systematic abuse of power. Corinne had created a shadow system of rules, applied arbitrarily and often punitively against residents she disliked. The Garcia family's bird bath violations, the retirement community's garden gnome restrictions. These were not random enforcement actions, but targeted harassment. Most disturbing was the discovery that Corinne had personally benefited from some HOA actions. Her brother-in-law owned the landscaping company that received exclusive contracts for violation remediation. Her sister worked for the security company that sold the very locks Corinne had mandated throughout the community. 10 days after the investigation began, state regulatory authorities stepped in. Unlike HOA boards, which operated with limited oversight, state housing authorities had real power. They imposed an immediate suspension of all HOA financial activities pending a complete audit. Corinne did not go quietly. She hired a prominent attorney and issued statements claiming she was being scapegoated for long-standing community issues. She filed counter-complaints against the town for failure to properly document critical infrastructure. But her support had evaporated. The 4 other HOA board members resigned, distancing themselves from her decisions. Former allies in the community now avoided eye contact when she entered the coffee shop. The neighborhood Facebook group, once her platform for announcements and warnings, became a forum for organizing the community against her. 3 weeks after the fire, the State Housing Authority held a public hearing. The room was even more crowded than the town hall meeting had been. Corinne sat alone at a table with her attorney, her posture rigid, her expression defiant. The hearing examiner, a stern woman with decades of experience, presented the findings methodically, her voice never rising but her words landing like hammer blows. The investigation has revealed a pattern of governance that violates state HOA regulations on multiple counts. Financial disclosures were falsified. Meetings were improperly documented. Fines were excessive and arbitrary. Perhaps most seriously, the HOA exceeded its authority by interfering with town emergency infrastructure, an action that demonstrably impacted emergency response during a crisis. Corinne's attorney attempted to argue procedural points, but the evidence was overwhelming. The hearing concluded with a series of binding orders. Corinne Witherspoon was permanently barred from serving on any HOA board in the state. She was personally fined $25,000 for regulatory violations. The HOA structure would be dissolved and reconstituted under state supervision. A special election would be held for an entirely new board, with strict oversight for the first year. As for me, I received a formal apology from the town, and a request to work with emergency services on documenting and protecting the water access point on my property. The media coverage extended beyond our local papers. A regional news magazine ran a feature titled, "When HOAs Go Too Far, the Pinecrest Case." Housing rights advocates cited the case in their ongoing work for HOA reform legislation. Corinne's public disgrace was complete. Her real estate business suffered as clients distanced themselves. Former friends avoided association. She stopped appearing at community events. One rainy morning in early December, I looked out my kitchen window to see a moving truck parked outside Corinne's house. Workers carried furniture and boxes while Corinne supervised, her face set in a grim expression. By evening, the house was empty, a "for sale" sign planted in the front yard. She had not said goodbye to anyone. There were no farewell parties, no community acknowledgments. The woman who had sought to control every aspect of our community had been forced to leave it behind. Justice had come not through confrontation, but through proper channels, investigation, and community solidarity, the very systems of accountability she had tried to manipulate. Spring arrived in Pinecrest with a sense of renewal. The scars of October's fire remained visible in the northwestern section of town, but so did the signs of recovery. New construction had begun on the Peterson and Knowles properties. The Thomas family had decided to sell their lot and move closer to their grandchildren, but a young couple had purchased it and begun clearing the burnt debris. The HOA had been reconstituted with a completely new board, elected in a record turnout vote. Their first official act was to repeal over 30 regulations Corinne had implemented, including the lock standardization requirements. Their second act was to establish a community oversight committee with representatives from each neighborhood sector. As for me, I had spent the winter working with the town engineer and fire department to formalize the water access arrangement. We installed a proper sign identifying the gate as "Emergency Water Infrastructure Access, Do Not Block or Lock." The fire department mounted a secure key box nearby with an access code known only to authorized personnel. On a warm April morning, I found myself repainting the old gate. Not the institutional green Corinne had dictated in her violation notice, but a warm, rustic red that matched the original color my father had chosen decades ago. Fire Chief Markson stopped by as I was finishing, his truck pulling up my driveway around noon. He carried an envelope and a small package. "Looks good," he said, nodding at the freshly painted gate. "Your father would approve." I set down my brush. I hope so. He never wanted anyone to even notice this gate. He just wanted it to work when needed. "That is the best kind of responsibility," Markson said, "the kind that does not draw attention until it matters." He handed me the envelope. "This is from the department." Inside was an official letter of thanks, signed by every member of the fire service. With it came a simple bronze plaque that read, "In recognition of community service and protection of critical infrastructure, Thornton family property." "We would like to mount this by the gate," Markson said, "if that is all right with you." I nodded, unexpectedly moved by the gesture. My father would have been honored. Later that afternoon, Mrs. Castillo brought over a homemade pie and news that Corinne's house had finally sold to a family with 3 children and a dog. "Real life coming back to the neighborhood," she said with satisfaction. That evening, I sat on my father's porch, my porch now, and watched the sunset paint the western hills gold and crimson. The same hills that channeled water down to our town through pipes laid generations ago. The same hills that had harbored the fire that changed our community. My father used to say that most people never think about the systems that support their daily lives. The water flowing through hidden pipes, the electricity running through buried cables, the complex web of agreements and responsibilities that allow a community to function. They take it all for granted until something breaks. What had broken in Pinecrest was not just a fire response system. It was the balance between individual rights and community needs, between authority and accountability. Corinne had believed that rules were more important than people, that control was more valuable than cooperation. Her failure was not just legal or procedural. It was a failure to understand what makes a community work. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared, I thought about how quietly my father had carried his responsibility for all those years. He never sought recognition or power. He simply did what needed to be done and respected the same in others. The newly painted gate stood at the edge of my property, its latch free of chains and locks. It was ready to serve its purpose when needed, and to stand unnoticed when not. In that way, it embodied everything my father had taught me about responsibility and community. Sometimes the biggest battle is not against fire or flood or natural disaster. Sometimes it is against the human tendency to place control above compassion, rules above reason, and personal power above public good. Karen had lost that battle, not because she faced a stronger opponent, but because she had misunderstood the nature of strength itself. As for me, I had gained something beyond victory in a neighborhood dispute. I had found my place in the continuing story of this land, this town, and the quiet responsibility passed from one generation to the next. The gate stood free, and so did we all.